Hey everyone, Corey from Aquarium Co-op. Today I want to talk about cycling in an aquarium, in particular a planted aquarium, but a lot of this is going to cover whether the tank is planted or not. And I have an entirely different philosophy than most. You know, as with everything, you probably already know this, I don't agree with the internet with almost anything, and it's because I go from my own personal experience. Not that I don't read a lot on the internet, I certainly do, but I develop best strategies and practices for myself based on what's worked really well for me. So, trying to think where I'm going to start here. A lot of times people run into problems when they're cycling their planted tank. And so, first, let's establish what cycling means. To the internet, cycling your aquarium means converting ammonia into nitrite, into nitrate, and then we would water change that out, and that's the cycle, right? Fish goes to the bathroom, we convert it once, we convert it twice, then we water change and take it out of the water, okay? Now in a planted aquarium, it can work differently because we could have that bacteria do the same thing, that can totally happen, but we could also have it where the fish goes to the bathroom, ammonia is in the water, a plant consumes that ammonia and makes new leaf or new growth, thus skipping converting the ammonia to nitrite and then converting it to nitrate and then water changing that out. The plant itself can physically remove it from the water, and that's why like human sewage facilities and things like that, they'll use lots of aquatic plants, typically water hyacinth and hornwort and other floaters, to just purely clean water. That's what plants do, is they pull things out of the water to grow, whether it's metals, whether it's ammonia in this case, or fertilizer. But the reality is, I would much rather cycle an aquarium, and I'm going to use quotes every time almost, cycle the aquarium with live plants. Now, let's establish what we're trying to accomplish. So the goal would be that a fish can live in the water and that waste doesn't build up enough to kill that fish. That's what cycling does. It puts a process in place to keep that from happening. Now, plants are just a different process of doing that same thing. So whether we physically change water, so we could change water every single day in our aquarium, and when a fish goes to the bathroom, there's urea in the water, ammonia. We do 100% water change, and the fish wouldn't die from ammonia, okay? We could also start relying on bacterias, and that's the path that most people take. We get a couple nitrifying bacterias in there going that will help convert that waste to less toxic forms to give us more time. So instead of having to change the water every day, maybe we have to change it every week or every month or something like that. Now, when we're first establishing the tank, we're not going to have enough of those bacteria to necessarily just go, well, I do it once a month. You might still have to do it once a day, once a week, that type of thing. Now, the way I like to cycle a tank is much different. Instead of really focusing on growing bacteria, I think overall we need to focus on just growing life. And when I say that, I mean, yeah, bacteria is a good thing, but so is live plants, so is algae. So when I'm advising someone, I would say the best thing we can do, in my opinion, is bring live plants to an aquarium and then use fertilizer. And once we start getting growth, we know that we can handle some waste, right? We can't measure it. That's where a lot of people get afraid, is they're going, I can't put my test strip in there or my liquid test kit or anything like that. It's not showing me that the tank is cycled. Even though the tank is showing you, you're just looking for what the internet has told you to look for. And so if your plant is this tall, but at the end of the week it's now this tall, it ate a ton of nutrients. And if you test your water and you go, well, we put ammonia in there, but it's not there anymore, but we don't have nitrates. The answer is, instead of it being nitrates, it's plant leaves. And so when we're looking for any sign of life, I either want to see a plant that's grown or I want to see Algae. Algae is just as good. Algae converts waste for us too and pulls it out of the water column and turns it into algae. So, and this goes back to the beginning where I said this applies even to tanks that don't have plants, because let's say the fish are going to eat them or something like that. If you can get algae growing on all the walls, let's say, then you're processing waste. You start putting some fish in there, and it'll keep up with a small amount of fish while the bacteria is colonizing along with it. And you might go, well, I don't want to look at algae, so you could scrub the front panel, but all three sides and maybe the gravel and all that's covered in algae, and that's going to help you get through the first stages. And so I just want to focus on, I don't think it's important whether, well, that's not true. I do think it's very important, but for most people, it's not going to matter whether you change water and take that waste out or the plant does it for you. The plant's actually more efficient at doing it and does a better job of it, but the internet, when I say they, doesn't really factor that in. And so the saltwater world is pretty in tune with it. They build algae scrubbers, and they use macroalgae and things like that to pull nitrogen or nitrates out of the water. And why do they do that? Because salt water is expensive and the animals can be very sensitive to the water changes. And so they know if we physically remove those chemical compounds from the water, then that is not quite as good as a water change, but it's very close. And in the case of a plant, I'd almost say it is as good as a water change. That being said, we do have to replenish minerals and things like that. So then we get into the debate of fish in cycling versus just ammonia cycling, which I'm going to throw in a third one. That my favorite one is fertilizer cycling. So if I take an empty aquarium and I just put light on it and I just start pumping in fertilizer, like this one's going to have nitrogen in it and things like that. And so let's say I just put fertilizer in. Eventually, either the water is going to turn green, or I'm going to grow a bunch of diatom algae, or I'm going to grow green algae and hair algae and all these things. All of those things are good because they show me the tank is now alive and starting to digest nitrogen. And, like on a lot of products, the source of nitrogen is different compounds of urea or fish pee, basically. And so if you can get a tank that's used to digesting that, when we go and start putting fish in, it handles that a lot easier. So imagine you've got a brand new tank, you put fish in there, they start going to the bathroom, we're going to fall behind in ammonia very quickly. But assume you had that same tank and you got it used to consuming fertilizer every week. As long as we put fish in there and feed them very lightly, it's going to be able to consume that as well. Now, one of the biggest bonuses for live plants, in my opinion, when it comes to cycling a tank, is when you take a live plant and you bring it home from the store, or it gets shipped to you, or any of these things, if there's any water on this plant still, it's going to have bacteria. Especially if you buy it in the pot, that rock wool has a ton of bacteria. And so now you're inoculating your aquarium with the beneficial bacteria. You're also bringing in a live plant that's going to consume ammonia, and it'll consume nitrite and nitrate, so it cleans all those up for you, and heavy metals and other toxins, and there's all these things that consume. But you're getting a 2-for-1. You get bacteria starter, and you're going to get the live plant that's going to consume stuff for you as well. So to me, it's like a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't we do live plants whenever we have the possibility to? Now, you can also use things like, let's say, C-Chem stability, which that's going to bring in some live bacteria, and it brings in food for it, and that helps jumpstart bacterial colony. But I still maintain I would rather watch a plant grow and visually see the tank thriving than just relying on a test kit. Because the problem people run into is bacteria can replicate very quickly. It can also die off very quickly. So let's say you're using the ammonia method and you're adding a part per million ammonia every week or every 3 days, and it's digesting it for you without plants. Then, let's say you don't add it for a few days, and then you go buy fish, and sometimes you'll get an ammonia spike again going, I don't get it, I cycle my tank. Well, bacteria can double every day. It can also die back every day. And so, you're on the false hope of you have all this bacteria, and so you slam a bunch of fish in there, and it doesn't go so well. Conversely, let's say you're going, oh, my tank's handling 4 parts per million ammonia, and you put 5 neon tetras in there. You've wasted a lot of time also, because they're going to produce like 1/10 of a part per million ammonia, depending on size of tank, obviously. But with plant growth and using fertilizer and stuff like that, you can have basically this whole big living filter of a tank, and you put fish in there, and it literally almost makes no difference, because the plants go, oh, more food? Great, I'll just grow a little bit faster. And, barring very outside the norm extremes of like, oh, I'm already putting so much fertilizer in there they can't possibly use it, and things like that, the plants can almost always compensate, that's what makes plants so magical and so amazing. So that's, one of the biggest problems people run into is they don't realize that the plants are that filter. That's the other thing, is they go, well, I'm waiting for my filter to cycle, and they might wait months because they still aren't seeing nitrates, but they're getting all this good plant growth, and that is nature's filter. And that's the important part, is nature doesn't buy a Fluval canister filter to keep the river alive. It grows plants. And so we're relying on man-made technology to do something that nature figured out thousands of years ago. And so why not tap back into some of the most evolved forms of filtration we can ever get our hands on and use them in conjunction with? Now, I'm not saying don't use filters or anything like that, or bacteria is bad. I'm just saying we've got this great tool at our disposal. Why not utilize it at least some? Even if we only ever grow algae, it's still a very beneficial thing. People are always so afraid, oh, I'm growing algae, oh no. But the reality is, you probably have things in your tap water that the algae is cleaning up for you, little bits of metal and things like that, and the algae will consume that, and overall your fish are going to be healthier for it. So when I am cycling a tank, I like it to either go, oh man, it's all algae filled, it's horrible. Then I put fish in there, guess what? I feed them like once a week, and meantime they're chowing down a lot of this algae and fixing the problem for me. And so they're naturally eating some algae. Algae's still growing. I'm feeding them once a week. Then the second week I'll feed them twice a week, and that'll be like, let's say, a Monday and a Thursday. The third week, then I feed them 3 times that week, and so on. Fourth week 4 times, fifth week 5 times, and then the whole time I still am fertilizing the aquarium if it's got live plants, because the live plants, we don't want them to die, obviously. And we don't want the fish to die either. It all depends. Like if you have a 1,000-gallon aquarium and you put 10 neon tetras in there, almost none of this is relevant. But if you have a 1-gallon tank and now we're putting 5 neon tetras in there, not only do I not recommend doing that, but on top of that, it's very relevant that we have plants and filtration really dialed in before we kind of overload that system. And so I've seen this question asked a few times on different forums and Facebook groups, and I end up getting tagged and pulled into it and having to explain what is going on to people. And I thought, you know what, I should just make this video, because so many people just don't get it, because the internet doesn't talk about this. They talk about, watch the nitrogen cycle. First we get ammonia, we get an ammonia spike, then we get a nitrite spike, and with ammonia starting to recede, then we're going to get, ammonia all the way gone, nitrite, pretty high. Then we're going to start building some nitrates, and that's going to drop off. And that's all they focus on, when they could be helping with live plants and things like that. Now, I realize there's lots of people that think, like, oh, African cichlids, plants are just food. Same with Central and South American cichlids. And for some species of fish, yes, that's true. But even in those setups, live algae and things like that could be very beneficial. You can also have things growing out of the aquarium. It doesn't have to be inside. You could have pothos, you could have bamboo, you could have all these things, peace lilies growing up out of the tank with all the roots pulling nitrogen out for you. And in my opinion, there's almost no other way that I would ever want to do it. Now, it's not going to replace ever having to do a water change. It's not saying you're never going to need some bacteria or anything like that. But this is this is how you cycle a planet tank. Get stuff living and growing first, then start adding your animals and move on from there. A lot of times in a heavily planet tank, we're going to focus on if you're only doing plants, and then you're going to add some fish later. The first things you're going to add might be like a mono shrimp or snails or things to start getting the algae in check while the plants are actually growing. And so, that's a perfectly fine way to do it too. What I don't like to see is people, they instantly go, well, I set up a new aquarium. I need a plecostomus. Why? Well, I don't want to see algae grow. And then I get into a long, conversation with them. Like, well, actually, that's exactly what you want to see. That's the best thing you could possibly see at this point in the game. Your tank is sterile. And so while we're on the topic of cycling a planted aquarium, I think it's a must that I address this, because I think it's another big misconception here. I feel that there is cycling a tank, so to speak, and then there is something which I call a seasoned tank. Now, cycling a tank means we can handle a load of fish, at least temporarily. So I've got 20 cardinal tetras, the tank can handle that, it's been 1 month, it's working. Now, a seasoned tank is a tank that, in my opinion, has been going for 6 months or more since the last big change. And changes would be things like changing of plants, changing of lights, changing of stock. I just added 10 more fish. That tank really gets dialed in and seasoned and becomes a much stronger ecosystem the longer it runs. And so, when it comes to things like shrimp that really want to feed off of algae and biofilm, which is kind of bacteria and other debris like mulm, at 2 weeks in, even though your tank is cycled and it can process ammonia to nitrates, those animals are still going to starve to death in that environment, even if you're trying to feed them. They're just going to starve. They got to eat 24 hours a day, basically. Now, if you take that same tank and you wait 4 to 6 weeks at a bare minimum, your tank will be more seasoned, even though it was cycled at 2 weeks, let's say. And that being said, 6 months down the road, that tank is even more well-seasoned. The gravel's got more mulm, you've got hardier strains of bacteria, you've got different types of bacteria, you've got all these things that this tank or ecosystem is culminating together long-term. And so, even though your tank may be cycled, and this is that 2 week scenario, you still might be getting some diatom algae and things like that, and it's not uncommon to watch a tank go from one algae to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, until eventually the ecosystem balances out and it becomes a stable system. Now, it's not necessarily going to kill any fish through those steps, but at the same time, when you are trying to breed a fish or really get plants growing or really get the best color out of your fish, that'll happen when that tank is very well seasoned. And I think most veterans in the hobby will agree, you get those tanks going where I'm like, I don't know, that tank is just bulletproof. It does so well. I never lose anything. I put fish in there, they just thrive. They're always spawning. Plants do well. And it's the tank that's been going for a long time. And it's not that you can't get some success in a newer tank, but most people would agree the longer it goes, the easier it is. And, rewind 50, 60 years ago, we used to think that aged water from an aquarium was like magical. There was some kind of property in there that made everything work. Now we know it's bacteria and the seasoning of a tank and, that ecosystem. But back then we thought, changing water, that can only harm. And the reality was, we ended up killing fish way back when with, things like nitrate poisoning and stuff like that, and bad heaters too, don't get me wrong. But, now we know, let's utilize all these things nature has given us. Let's utilize the things that man has created. Let's put those two together and make a really strong system. And that's why we can keep a fish longer and healthier than the wild, because we've fused nature and manpower together to maybe create some better diets. We've got more reliable temperatures, we've got more reliable water quality and stuff like that. Technology is advanced and we are doing better than ever for our animals. And so, the reliance comes on, well, technology is great, but there's still some things that nature has figured out that we will never figure out, or that we should at least utilize. So that's how I recommend cycling a tank. Use plants. Try to get some that are already coated in bacteria, you know. And when I'm saying that is, don't use like bulb plants and stuff like that. You can, but realize they're not going to bring the bacteria in for you either. You could also, you know, this is going beyond this, but you could also use like a handful of gravel from an established tank. That will jumpstart your beneficial bacteria. But in reality, I still prefer plants. Plants, always plants, because it's just better long term. So I hope you found that useful, and I hope it's explaining why you might not be seeing any nitrite or nitrate. You just watch it go from ammonia to nothing, no matter what you do. Look at the plants. Are the plants growing? Are you making new leaves? Are you getting algae? All those are signs that you could start playing with some fish and things like that. If you're not getting new leaves and not getting algae and things like that, that's a sign your tank's not alive yet. And when a tank's not alive, we shouldn't be putting live things into it. So, hope that helps. We'll see you in the next video. Plants 101, trying to cover lots of things. Make sure you check out other videos. We've got videos on algae and lighting and substrates and fertilizers and, you know, plants themselves. All these things to get you started on a planted tank. This is cycling. This is kind of, you know, earlier in the steps there, but hopefully I broke it down in an easy to understand way. And if we have, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Otherwise, if you're already following us, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.